Welcome back to Pure Accelerate 2026. We're streaming live in Las Vegas. I'm Alison, joined alongside by Christophe, Bertrand, and we're about to bring in a customer testimonial on the logistics virtualization journey, and more specifically with CSX, and let's get right to it and bring in our guests. We've got Eric Grabill, the lead senior product manager of IT at CSX. Welcome to theCUBE.
Thank you.
And alongside him is Greg Muscarella. He's the general manager of Portworx at Everpure. Thank you so much for joining us. Eric, I'm going to start with you. CSX operates some of the most critical infrastructure and logistics in North America. What are you aiming to do with operations, and what were the specific signals that made you realize that, that now was the moment to move to a more a modern virtualization path?
Yeah, so with the changes in the virtualization landscape recently, with acquisitions and such, we were looking at not being stuck with one vendor. Fortunately, we had quite an experience and background and knowledge in OpenShift, and so it just caused us to look at, well, first, what else is out there, and then once we realized OpenShift was a enterprise platform that could also handle the virtualization, then it was just a matter of proving out that it was capable of the resiliency that we needed, those things.
Yeah, Greg, talk me through about Portworx, the business unit within Everpure.
So Portworx is a software-based business unit that works primarily with Kubernetes, or only with Kubernetes, to really provide a storage abstraction layer that solves a lot of storage-related problems for people who are running any workloads in Kubernetes that require persistence, right? So certainly virtual machines is one of those, and they have some special uses, but there's also a lot of other container-based applications, whether it be AI-related or database-related or ML workflows that require persistence as well. So we really make that simple and unify it across all your environments.
Right, so, Eric, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions about your environment. Obviously,
yep.
Very major logistics company, a virtualization, migration, not a small feat. So tell us about the environment. I believe you have a few thousand VMs,
yeah,
a bunch of applications. Tell us more.
Yeah, so we have a hybrid cloud environment. We had 2 data centers that we managed. Over the last 3 years, we've migrated about 80% of our workload into the cloud. And VMs, the goal was to migrate into the cloud first and continue running on the historical VM platform, but now we're looking for what's next, and as well as wanting to be able to have a solution that meets both on-premise. We still have about 20% of our workload, VMs and applications that are running in our data center, our private data center, but we wanted to have a solution that could span both of them.
Right. So out of curiosity, what makes you decide to run on-prem versus in the cloud?
Mostly it's requirements of the FRA, but a little bit of it is just self-choice of risk, how much risk we can accept. So we have pretty critical infrastructure that we call Tier 0, PTC and dispatch. And PTC is the positive train control. And we do have the goal, eventually, of running that in the cloud, but our normal behavior is run our normal technology environment on a new product, in a new environment in the cloud, prove it out over multiple years, and then PTC and dispatch could follow thereafter. But we're still using the same products, so as we migrate our PTC and dispatch off of VMs and onto container, we're going to do that with Portworx, and then it would be an easier transition. We'll have proved it in our data center, and then use the same products and move that into the cloud eventually. And
in relation to Portworx, is trying to find out what were the must-have requirements that you tested for when you evaluated selecting your new stack, and how did Portworx perform against those benchmarks that you had? Yeah, so it was, I would say number one, it's resiliency. It's so making sure that it's highly available, the same what we're used to, but that it's highly available first. Second would be speed. So we did a proof of concept, or a minimal viable product, I believe they're calling it now, to prove that we could build a VM from scratch in a reasonable amount of time. We could migrate an existing VM live from host to host. We tested the migration from VMware and onto an OpenShift virtualization with Portworx. And so it was
the speed of that mattered. We tested against a couple of variations of using ODF, of using local disk, using NetApp, using Pure and Portworx, and obviously we chose and went with Pure and Portworx because it was the fastest.
So Greg, I have a question for you. This is very interesting. Sounds like we're enterprise ready, but isn't there still a debate around VM on Kubernetes being enterprise class?
Well, look, I think the adoption by critical infrastructure like CSX running this on tier 0 type applications and keeping the trains running on time proved that we've gone beyond those questions, right? And so I think the other piece is I get very few arguments from everyone who like the future is all about containers and that's the direction we want to go. Right. If we can turn virtual machines just into another containerized workload, that seems to get us all down that path, and hence you have one platform that can run your containerized applications already, and we can also bring along those virtual machines for the ride as well.
Yeah, and economies of scale was a big part of it as well, to be able to say, I don't have to retrain an entire team to do something different. They already know infrastructure with OpenShift. There are differences, for sure. I'd absolutely say it's not identical, but the same, I have a very lean team that manages our clusters.
So, which brings up an interesting question, which we talked about for a few minutes earlier. What about KPIs? What KPIs do you use, or would you recommend people use, especially as they go through this transition from a legacy vendor to a new world, really?
I think some of them that were critical to us were how tightly can we pack the infrastructure. So that's more of an OpenShift question than a Portworx question. But how much extra overhead do you need to allow for the operators that are managing the system overhead for Portworx? So because the overall cost, then we have to share that across the applications, not just what they're actually using, but what's necessary to run the actual cluster. So that was an important factor. And then obviously price. And that's something that Red Hat, I think, is doing very well, seizing on the opportunity and have a pretty good price. Hopefully it stays as low as it is now.
Greg, I'm going to turn to you for a moment. When customers move away from legacy virtualization platforms, what do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions that they may have about the migration process?
Well, some people come in thinking it is one for one, as Eric already said, look, it's not the same platform, and we don't intend it to be, right? So one piece I'd highlight in the transition is you're going from an environment and a culture that really was around, again, in Kubernetes world we talk about pets, right? Where everything is sort of somewhat unique and managed by hand, to one where it's more about cattle, and you manage more at scale. And so we really don't want to bring that pets mentality to virtual machines or anything else running on Kubernetes. We want to keep that ability to manage lots of workloads with very few operators, at scale. And so I think that's one thing I would look at, is make sure that people are ready to make that transition as well. It's not just about technology, it's about how you operate and how you think about your applications and your workloads.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to this KPI question of efficiency, operational efficiency, as well as resilience, to the extent that you don't want things to fail. You can't really YAML your way out of this one, so you have to have that built in. So Portworx recently had some announcements. Can you walk us through some of the recent announcements that you did?
Yeah, I just hit a couple that we talked about recently at Red Hat Summit, for instance. One of the things we talked about is our integration into the OpenShift console, right? So something that customers do want to see is when there are, virtual machines that they want to look at, they want to see the compute and the data and storage side of it all in one interface. And so that plugin helps them manage everything from a single pane of glass. Other things are like secure boot, so just make sure that we have, some of the normalized, very secure operational procedure to make sure you're running untampered and secure encryption within your machines. And then something else called CUBE Data Store, so KDS for short. This is something that allows us to manage a lot more storage backends, pool those, and aggregate them into a single virtualized storage pool that we can then divvy up to virtual machines or containers, and just simplify the operations, radically reduce sort of the storage overhead, a lot more efficiency in that. So a lot of really good things that have been coming out, and we have a lot more in the works.
How many customers do you have now? I remember Portworx from, a few years ago. I'm not going to date myself, and pre-Everpure. So how many customers do you have today, or is there a good metric that you use to measure your business success?
Yeah, I actually don't know the full number of customers. I'll just say it's 400 plus. probably well above that, but we see a lot of interest everywhere. And I think something to really look at this is they run the gambit from smaller customers that have maybe 1,000 nodes up to companies that operate in 50 factory locations with large data centers and in the tens to 20s to 30s of thousands of virtual machines and whatnot. So really running the gambit.
Right, I'm going to ask a question to both of you. I'm going to start with Eric. Same question, so you get a little bit of time to sit on it for a minute, Greg. For the IT leader who's watching and maybe facing a major virtualization renewal, what is the most important advice that you'd give them based on your journey?
I would say it's not easy. You definitely have to take the time to think about it, and we did go through the exercise we did a OpenShift health check, I believe they call it, with Red Hat, and we did the white glove service with Portworx. Even with somebody, we have 10 years of experience, but there's a lot of questions that we just didn't know to ask. There's a lot of choices that have implications down the road. So my recommendation would be, they were very, very thorough, both Red Hat and Portworx, is to pay that extra service for that white glove service. We're reaping the benefits of it right now, and I think it's well worth it.
Greg, what do you think? Maybe you can underscore what customers actually experience in production terms.
Well, let me start with one of the pieces people are thinking about, like, they need to decide early. Give yourself plenty of time. We've had customers that have waited till the last minute, and then we get through it, but it's very rushed. You have higher opportunity for error and things like that. When you get to the point where you're running in production, there's going to be back to those differences of how do you actually operate your environment and what do you want to achieve with it. And I think something I'd also encourage people to do is look at the outcomes they want to do beyond just that migration, because there's so much more you can do once you finally are on a platform that is a declarative platform that lets you scale out, as well as move to additional environments, like be able to go hybrid cloud or decide what workloads you may want to go up or down, because again, Kubernetes itself is a nice abstraction layer between clouds and on-prem.
Right.
So Eric, as you complete the migration, what's next after the migration? Back to what Greg was saying, are there some projects you're looking at, or maybe any AI-related topics you want to cover?
I would say next is probably looking at where Portworx can help us in our containerization space. Okay. We're focusing on using it for the virtualization, right. But in containerization, we've kind of shied away from offering persistent volumes. We've said applications run in the pods in Kubernetes, but store your data elsewhere. But if we, as we find success with Portworx and can manage it the same way that we manage a VM, manage a containerized persistent volume, I think that'll be a next logical step, an inevitability that we'll have to do.
Right. And are there specific applications you're targeting for?
Just all. I think we have 400 plus applications that run all kinds of, from safety to the ship CSX is our major, and any that could benefit from having persistent storage, because a major problem we have with storing everything in the database is now if we're multi-region, if we're running in Azure East and we're running in Azure Central, the database is not read-write many in both locations, where if we transform those applications to be more persistent volume usage, then we might be able to run them in multi-regions and then worry less about the DR strategy and just trust multi-region.
Greg, do you think we'll look back 5 years from now and see Kubernetes-based virtualization as the default operating model for enterprises, much in the way VMware became the default 20 years ago?
It's an interesting question. My crystal ball doesn't quite, give me an answer there. I'll say, at least we'll have a competitive environment, right? Well, customers have the ability to choose. I think on the Kubernetes side as well, it's open source, right? So you should have a proliferation of options on that front as well. So I would hope to see people run their workloads wherever they want to. But I'll also say, again, and I think to the AI question a little bit here, you're going to see a lot more container native workloads. Like we're on this path that people were all new applications are already containerized. It wasn't really worth the effort to take an already existing virtual machine-based application and move it over. But if you look at the cadence or the pace with which you're writing new applications now with the assistance of AI, I think it accelerates that move to a lot more container-based workloads, back to the point of being able to run those.
Right, I was going to say, it seems to me that AI itself, with what it allows you to do, will very naturally foster this explosion of of containerized environments, but probably for the better actually, given the performance characteristics. And you mentioned business continuity, that's another obviously big advantage. We've covered a lot of ground.
Thank you so much for stopping by theCUBE. Great talking with both of you, Eric and Greg.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Alison. Thanks,
and
Christophe.
you've been watching theCUBE, the leader in live tech coverage and in-depth tech analysis. We will be right back.